What's going on, guys? I'm from Geeked Out and welcome to my top 5 phones of 2015. Just a quick disclaimer, this is my own opinion. If you disagree with this, write in the comments down below what you think should have happened, but again, it's my own opinion. I've used some sources from like websites like CNET, Techno Buffalo, Unbox Therapy. I've used a few of those sources just to back up my point a bit. Let's get started. So at number 5, we've got the Nexus 6. I really like this device. So let's see what the pros are of this device. This has great performance. I mean, when you look at the specs of this phone, which I'll talk about in a second, they're just great. This phone has great performance, and it's also got no bloatware. Since it's a Google version only, there's no skins, there's no TouchWiz UI, there's no this and that. You can get launchers from the Google Play Store if you like that type of thing, but you know, personally for me, that's why I buy Nexus devices, because they're bloatware free and they're just great devices overall. Also has a gorgeous expansive display. This display is amazing, 6 inches. That's a massive display. That's a phablet style display. It's also got clear stereo speakers at the front facing stereo speakers, just like the HTC One M8 and M7 and whatever. The HTC One M series had front-facing stereo speakers, which really does help when watching movies on a phone this big. 6 inches, you can easily watch some good movies on it. It's just like a Nexus 7 tablet. It's also got a really long battery life, and it's got Android 5.0 out of the box. Now, what I'm kind of disappointed about of this device, it's got terrible camera software. Now, I'm not blaming Nexus for this. This is Google's own software, but it's the only camera software implemented into the device anyway, since it's Android 5.0 stock. Google camera sucks. It's really simple to use, but there's no expandability. So someone which is like a camera geek, someone like me, which really wants to, you know, lock exposure, lock focus, this and that, to get a really nice picture or a video, I can't do that. I have to download aftermarket software like Camera FV5 or Cinema FV5, and I have to buy that software just because if I want to lock exposure and do that. I think if Google Camera can do that, it will be a great feature. It's also got some software bugs. So some software bugs, I think that's just because of the rough release of Android 5.0, but I think that's already sorted by now, and it's not great for one-handed use. This phone is massive, it's 6 inches big, it's literally the size of a Nexus 7, put it that way. It's a massive phone, you should be using 2 hands to use this phone. With its massive screen, it still lacks one main feature: no split screen multitasking. Even though this phone can handle it with the great specs it has, it still can't multitask with that split screen feature. I see why the older Nexuses couldn't, because they had a bit of a smaller screen, like Nexus 4 had a 4.7, Nexus 5 had a 5-inch screen, but this has a 6-inch screen, that's an 0.5 bigger. Come on, you can easily put split screen multitasking in it. It still lacks expandable memory slot, which I think every Nexus had. It would be great if it didn't. I mean, I would like to expand my storage on my Nexus myself, but I can't because I still have to stick with my 16GB version anyways. And it's the most expensive Nexus phone out, literally. The Nexus 5, when it first came out on launch, it wasn't even that expensive then. How much the Nexus 6 cost. Let's go to the specs. So the display of this device is an AMOLED capacitive display, so it's not resistive obviously. It's a whole 6 inches, and the resolution of this device is 1440p, so 2560 by 1440, which has a 493 pixel PPI pixel density. It uses cornering Gorilla Glass 3, and it runs on Android 5.0 and upgradable to 5.1, because obviously every Nexus device is going to get their update first. Now, it has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 805 chipset, which is a quad-core 2.7 GHz Crate 450 CPU with an Adreno 420 GPU. I would have liked to see a 430, but 420 is still great. There's no card slot, but there's an internal 32 and 64GB option, which also includes 3GB of RAM. The camera itself is a primary 13 megapixel camera with dual LED flash, which is that ring thing which they had on the, I think it's the, it was a Motorola phone. Again, this phone is made by Motorola, because obviously Google Nexus phones are not actually made by Google. They run Google, but they're not made by Google themselves. And the front camera is a 2 megapixel. It can record up to 2160p video at 30 frames per second as well. So I think the specs are really good. The price itself is £499 or $649 US. So at number 4, we've got the OnePlus One, a great phone. So I really like this phone. I mean, it's got great value for what the type of specs you're getting. I think it's got really good value. It's a kind of a cheap phone, without compromise. It's a really good phone. It's highly customizable out of the box. Even though it runs on its own skin, it's still quite highly customizable. It's got a fantastic massive display. For how much it costs, the display is absolutely ginormous. And it's got premium hardware, so that means the build quality of this phone is really good. And it's just a great phone overall when it comes to specs. Now, what I didn't like about this phone is it kind of stutters when it has intensive tasks. I think that's not related to the phone itself. I think the skin is a bit, it's kind of like the phone itself is in beta right now. It's still not fully properly utilized by us, but I just like the phone itself. It's also got limited availability. There's this thing where you have to buy it on a Tuesday and this like that, and you have to get selected. I didn't understand it, but it's got really limited availability. You can go to Amazon and buy it, but overall it's just quite hard to get right now. And it's also got a low speaker volume. Let's talk about the specs of this phone. We are having a 5.5 inch screen, which is an LTPS LCD capacitive touchscreen. LCD, okay, 16 million colors, which is fine by me. And it's also got a 1080p display. Now, I don't mind a 1080p display. I would have liked to see a 1440p display, but that has a 401 ppi, so 401 pixel per inch density. It has cornering Gorilla Glass 3, and the skin on the phone is CyanogenMod 11S. That's what it starts with. I think there's CyanogenMod 12 coming out as well soon. But it's based on Android KitKat, which is 4.42, upgradable to 4.4.4. It has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chip, which is a quad-core 2.5 GHz Crate 400 CPU, and the GPU on this phone is an Adreno 330. There's no expandable storage, which is kind of disappointing, but the internal memory can go from 16 GB all the way to 64. It also features 3 GB of RAM. The primary camera is a 13 megapixel camera with a dual LED flash, and the secondary camera is a 5 megapixel camera with 1080p 30 frames per second video. The video quality itself is 4K, so 2160p at 30 frames per second. Also, you can record at 24 frames per second, or 1080p 60 frames per second, or 720p 120 frames per second, which is really good for what the device is. I think this device is perfect. At number 3, we've got the Galaxy S6 and Galaxy S6 Edge. So today is the 10th of April and the devices have been released. These devices are pretty good. Now, Samsung are pretty much in the market on the high-end devices, but it still reaches at number 3, which is really good. What I like about the S6, so not the S6 Edge, they're pretty much very similar, except the S6 has the curved edges around it. What I like about the S6, it has a gorgeous screen, really good screen, and it also features new smart camera tech. I mean, I've realized that all Samsung phones have really good cameras. They've always had really good cameras. It's got excellent performance, and it's got an improved fingerprint scanner. Now, with this new fingerprint scanner, I think Apple might be suing Samsung. Just saying, because Apple were really the first company to get in the market of having fingerprint sensors on their phones. Now, Samsung have got it. It's a bit weird. I don't know why, but it's just, I don't know. And it also supports wireless charging, so you can have the key charger from Nexus. It works just perfectly. What I didn't like about the device, the edges and the surfaces really do get smudges, which I suppose it's normal. And it gets notably hot when it gets pushed. I think that's because it's really thin surfaces, but you can actually, it goes really hot. And it's also got non-expandable storage. Again, I think most of these devices have non-expandable storage. The battery life's average. Samsung devices have had a bit of an issue where they don't really have the up to grabs battery life. Now, this is a 5.1 inch Super AMOLED display, which is Samsung's own display. And it's got a 1440p resolution with a whopping 577 ppi pixel density, which is really good. Cornering Gorilla Glass 4 with the TouchWiz UI skin, which I'm not a big fan of, but I think the TouchWiz UI has really been improved from the Galaxy S6, which was absolutely terrible. It runs on Android OS 5.0 Lollipop, which is based on, and the chipset is the Exynos 7420, which is a great chipset for what it is. It's a quad-core 1.5 GHz A53 or a quad-core 2.1 GHz Cortex A57. I would have liked to see the clock speed a bit higher for the S6 and S6 Edge, but I suppose that's what it is then. It's got a Mali GPU, which is the T760 MP8. It's got no card slot as I mentioned before, but the internal memory is quite high with 32, 64 and 128GB configurations running on 3GB of RAM. The primary camera is a 16 megapixel camera with a standard LED flash, but the video is 4K, so 2160 at 30 frames, 1080p 60 FPS and 720p 120 FPS. It also features a secondary, which is the front camera, which is a 5 megapixel 1440p 30 frames per second with dual video call and auto HDR. At number 2, we've got the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. Also, the price for the S6 comes from £600 or $700. That's the S6. The S6 Edge currently in the UK is only available on contract. On any contracts for £47, and you have to pay £100 upfront cost. So that's for the phone. But in the US, it comes up to $900. So it's a really expensive phone, but I think it's kind of worth it for what it is. Back to the number 2 spot, which is the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. This phone is really good. I think Apple really have pushed the market here. What I like about it is much sleeker, thinner design. It's comfortable to hold as well. It's not that of a hard one, because the iPhones, the previous iPhone like the 5S will have these really rigid design. They were quite thick and bulky, I think. But this one's quite comfortable to hold. It's got excellent performance. It's got improved LTE and Wi-Fi speeds, and it's got a really good display. What I don't like about is no optimization for the large screen. That's made for the 6 Plus. It's got weird camera lenses. I don't know if this is for, like, only some of the 6 Plus and iPhone 6 have weird camera lenses. I don't know, it's quite protruding. And no memory expansion, which have never been offered for iPhone, so I don't see why I'm saying that. And it lacks 4K video recording, which I thought would be a must because the camera lenses are pretty good in this. But okay, fine. If you don't want to add 4K, I don't know then. Let's look at the specs. You've got a 4.7-inch screen. That's for the iPhone 6. I think the other one's a 5.5. But we're just going to talk about the iPhone 6 itself, which has a 1334p display or 750p display, which is not really my type of display, only on 326 ppi. But then again, it's Apple, they make great quality devices, trust me. Like, it's got ion strengthened glass, which is, so instead of cornering Gorilla Glass, it's got ion strengthened glass which, with the phobic coating, which protects you from fingerprints, which still doesn't help me. It's got iOS 8, and it runs on Apple's A8 chipset, which is a dual-core 1.4 GHz Cyclone chip, which is based on the ARM V8, and has a PowerVR GX 6450 quad-core graphics GPU. I would have liked to see Apple get into the quad-core market of phones, because the iPad has a 3-core CPU. I don't understand the logic in having 3. Why don't you have 4 cores? It just makes performance better, and it's 4 cores, it makes a lot more sense. The camera is an 8 megapixel, which is decent, but which has a dual LED flash. And the features of this, I'm not going to talk about the sensors because there's a long list of sensor features. Let's say it's a third sensor size. That's what I'm saying. And the video quality on this phone is 1080p 60 frames per second and 720p 240 FPS. This is great when it comes to video, but it still lacks that 4K support, which I'm kind of disappointed about. It's also got a 1.2 megapixel front camera, which supports 720p 30 FPS video recording. And there's also another comment which I wanted to talk about is NFC can only be used for mobile payments, so Apple Pay, which is not available in the UK yet, which is a bit sad. We always get the things after. And the number 1 spot, which I'm really impressed that this phone has made it back again after last year. This phone was top of the previous model, which was the HTC One M. You probably know what I'm talking about, is the HTC One M9. This is an amazing phone, an excellent phone for what it is. What I like about it, it's got this speedy performance. It's got the top of the range specs, top of the line specs, excellent build quality, which I've seen from every HTC One M phones, from the M7, M8 and M9, all the mini editions as well. They're just great quality build. It's got Sense 7, which again is a different skin, but I'm quite impressed. I actually like Sense 7, and Google, the original version of Android and Sense 7, I think I really like both. I'm still not a big fan of TouchWiz UI, but I really like Sense 7. It's pretty good. It's got quick charging, which works well, and it's got the customizable UI, which is supported in Sense 7. Now, there's a few things which I didn't like. And the screen isn't vivid as last year's model. I don't know if that's true or not, but from what I can tell, the screen's a bit not more popping out and everything. I don't know. The aesthetic changes are not an improvement. There's only a few changes, I think. There's not a lot. And it's only got a few improved from the M8. The battery life is sometimes a hit or a miss, and it's quite an expensive device itself. By the way, the iPhone 6 Plus and 6 had a price of £600 for the £539 for the iPhone 6, or $713, or £619 for the Plus model, or $830. So it's quite an expensive phone. But when it comes to HTC, we'll see a different story. Now, when I said it's quite expensive, it's not that expensive, but it is quite expensive for what you're getting. It's a 5-inch display, which is a 1080p display, which is a 441 pixel density, so PPI and all that. Uses Corning Gorilla Glass 4 with HTC Sense UI 7.0. It runs on Android 5.0, which I don't think it's upgraded to 5.1 yet. And it has the Snapdragon 810 chip, which is the highest of all these devices, which is a quad-core 1.5 GHz Cortex A53 chip, or a quad-core 2 GHz A57. It features an Adreno 430 GPU. It has a micro SD card slot, which I'm really impressed, which can go up to all the way to 128 gigabytes, and the internal memory is 32 gigabytes with 3 gigabytes of RAM. The camera is a primary 20.7 megapixels. That's really high and really good. And I think this deserves to be in the top list. It's got a 4K camera which records at 30 frames per second, a 1080p video camera which records up to 60 frames, and a 720p which records up to 120 frames per second. It's also got dual tone LED flash. Now, what I'm really impressed is that they changed the camera quality from the HTC One M8. I wasn't really impressed with the 4 ultra pixel thing going on with the 2 cameras. I prefer having one camera which has really good quality. It also features a secondary 4 megapixel camera which records video at 1080p at 30 frames per second with HDR mode. So pretty much that's it. These are my 5 phones which I think really deserve to be on this list for 2015. Next year I'll probably make one for 2016. And after this video I'll be making the top 5 tablets. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this top 5. This is my first top 5 video. If there's anything that needs to be improved, please write down in the comments below so I can improve on my content that I make currently right now. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.